Mr. Adam Whitty, welcome back to another episode of Build Your Authority.
Oh, Bardavia, good to be with you.
Good to be with you, sir. And we're going to be talking about books because, this is sort of how you built your company and the brand. And can you just take us back real quick, because we're going to get into book placements, but who gave you the idea, or how were you inspired to do publishing? Because I know you've always been sort of like this nerdy entrepreneur kid starting businesses in college. You were that guy, but why books?
Yeah, so I've never referred to myself as a nerdy entrepreneur, but I appreciate the fact that you took liberty to do that.
Maybe someone else. Maybe someone else.
Yeah. Well, so look, you can't spell authority without the word author, and while you don't have to publish a book to build your authority, certainly it is a accelerant. It's a catalyst. But the story, Joe, is when I was in high school. And I grew up in Central Florida, so it's really hot in the summer. I was growing up in Florida. It was high school, and my parents said, son, you've got to get a job. And my options were to be a bag boy at Publix, which didn't sound all that appealing, or conveniently, and to my great luck, our next door neighbor, who was an executive at a book publishing company, offered me a paid internship. And not ever having any desires or dreams to be in publishing, I said, well, I'd rather have a paid internship in air conditioning than to bag groceries at Publix. And that was it. That was the decision. I spent 2 summers at this publishing company. What I thought I would hate, I found really interesting. I went off to college at Clemson. And when I was there, I started a business. So I had this entrepreneurial itch, this desire to do something on my own. And when I graduated, I had started a business in college, but it wasn't a big success. I'm back home in Orlando. I'm having lunch with one of my mentors. And the mentor is a guy named Pat Williams, and he's the founder of the Orlando Magic basketball team. And, my dream as a kid first was to play basketball. It was very obvious that was never going to happen. At least not in any professional capacity. And then my second dream was to run a basketball team, to be the general manager of an NBA basketball team. So I thought, well, if that's the dream, I got to talk to somebody that's done that. And Pat, having founded the team, he ran the team for probably 20 years. And I looked him up and wrote him a letter, and we began a great friendship and a mentorship. So Pat and I are having lunch. He had written a number of business books himself, and he looked at me straight across the table and he said, Adam, you need to start a publishing company for CEOs and entrepreneurs, because they all have great knowledge, and when they write the book on the topic, they're going to be seen as the expert and they're going to be seen as the authority. And so that is really how all of this came to be. On July 19th, 2005, that's when Advantage Media came to life, and our first Advantage book title published just a month or 2 after that. And as they say, the rest is history. And look, the business is what it is today because of talented people like you and talented people like KJ. It has much less to do with me. But there you go. That's a bit of the background.
Yeah, and I don't know what people would talk about you being a nerdy entrepreneur. You were a cool entrepreneur. I don't know where that came from. But anyway, you mentioned KJ. KJ Growh is the senior director of distribution at Forbes Books. KJ, welcome to Build Your Authority.
Thanks, Joe. It's so nice to be here.
So we're going to talk about books. And so Adam shared his book story. Can you just share, before we get started into what you do at Forbes Books, your love of books and how this became a 20-year journey for you?
Sure. Yeah. I was a voracious reader at a very young age and always wanted to do something with books. And I think most kids, when they're growing up, if they think they want to work with books, they're not sure. Does that mean being a writer? Does that mean being an editor? And so it takes some education to understand what the possibilities are in working with books. So my senior year of college, I took an internship at a small independent press in Minnesota called Grey Wolf Press. They're a very esteemed press that does award-winning literary fiction and poetry. And And then from there, I moved to New York City, where, of course, it's the hub of publishing. I attended the Columbia Publishing course and got my first job at Penguin Books from there. I moved around a little bit. I worked at Penguin and Random House and Simon & Schuster and stayed in New York for 11 years. And I came up on the sales and marketing side of the business, which is not something I could have imagined before. I didn't know really that those jobs existed until I was actually working at a bookstore in Minnesota, Barnes & Noble, and a sales rep from Random House came into the store, and she was presenting to the bookselling team the forthcoming titles for the season of books that Random House was publishing. And I thought, oh my God, that is the coolest job in the world. Like, I want to go tell booksellers and tell people about books that are coming. I want to be the first to read manuscripts. I want to have the early word. And so that's how I got introduced to the world of sales and marketing and book publishing.
From an internship, Adam, you and KJ are a long lost brother and sister in the way that publishing came into your lives, Adam.
Well, I figured you were going to call us two book nerds.
No, I would never do that.
No, but what's really neat about KJ's story is that not only is she in sales and marketing for books, but she was there where it all happened. She was on the retail floor at Barnes & Noble. And yes, 67% of books today are purchased on Amazon, but having the experience of literally interacting with the reader who comes in and says, this is the type of book I'm looking for, or I'm looking for this book, being able to interact and understand what are the motivations for them wanting that book or wanting a book in this genre, man, that just, I'm sure, KJ, made you a much better marketer and a much better advocate for the author, having spent so much time on the actual retail floor where books have been sold.
Oh, absolutely. And whenever I talk to someone who's interested in getting their foot in the door in publishing, I say, my first recommendation is to go work in a bookstore, because you really understand how books are shelved, how they're sold, what's trending, what people are asking for. And so it's a really exciting environment. And, I know one of the editors we recently hired, Lindsay Clark, has book selling experience too. And so we've talked about that, and it's really enriching.
Yeah.
And so this podcast is all about building your authority. So let's start with that, KJ. How can publishing a book help establish someone as a thought leader in their industry or field?
Yeah, well, I think most people may not know that publishing a book is actually really hard. It's a lot of words. It's, usually we're looking at about 50,000 words, 10, 12 chapters. And so it really requires you to go deep in your experience and your ideas and get them out on paper and flesh them out thoroughly and fill in with stories and relevant details and create a framework that's going to be useful for a reader. And so when you've put in that level of commitment and discipline to write and complete a book, I think it really elevates how you think about your work and your work in the world and your purpose. It really clarifies for you a lot of things, because when you're writing a book, by the nature of writing a book, you're teaching. And so you're really creating this platform by which you can educate a reader, can solve a pain point in their life. But it also gives you this launching pad to go out and teach the work that you've written about in the world as well.
And Adam, at the end of the last episode, you mentioned the P word, placement. Let's just dial that back a little bit in case anyone missed it. Talk about the importance of placement, Adam.
Yeah. So look, writing and publishing a book is a substantial part of building authority. It's not something that you have to do, but it's something that if you endeavor to do, is quite impactful for your authority building, thought leadership building efforts. And we're going to focus a lot today on books, but specifically distribution and sales of books. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about this episode, and I'm going to refer many authors or want to be authors to listen and watch this episode, there is so many incorrect misconceptions about how books are marketed, how they're sold, how they're distributed, how they're placed. And, the misconceptions are myriad from, I've got a manuscript, I want to publish it in 2 months, and why isn't it on a bookstore shelf? Or I am publishing a book and Amazon wants to set the retail price at $29.99, but I only want it to sell for $10. Why does Amazon get to decide? I see Amazon just discounted my book. I don't want them to discount my book. So don't let them do that. And I could go on and on and on. So there are just so many misconceptions, and there's a dearth of knowledge that most want to be authors or soon to be authors have when it comes to book distribution, book sales, book marketing. I'm really excited for KJ to dispel many of the myths and or inform and educate many authors for things that they don't know, but maybe they assumed that they knew.
Yeah, and KJ is known as the people and process whisperer, KJ, and obviously that comes from your experience. But tell before we go into what you do, what does that mean? Why do people feel like you have this ability to kind of speak the language that Adam was talking about, like to cure those misconceptions, to inform people about how things actually work?
Well, I think it comes from empathy, and knowing that almost all of the authors that we're publishing are doing this for the first time, and they're not experts in book publishing. How would they know? And so for those of us who have been doing this for 20 years, like, we have been through it, and we know the common questions that come in, the common misconceptions, and we never assume that anyone has it all figured out. And so it's really about holding their hand through the process, making sure that they have the information that they need and can have the information they need to make the decisions that will most impact their publishing process.
If you could just help an author understand the timeline. And look, I wrote a book many years ago titled Book the Business: How to Make Big Money with Your Book Without Selling a Single Copy. And I am unabashed in my promotion of the idea that the worst way to make money is by selling your books, right? And I've written 7 books myself, and so I am speaking from experience. If you can make money selling books, more power to you. And every author that I meet, they say, yeah, I get it. It's not about selling books, but I'd really love to sell books. So for authors that want to sell books, and that's all of us, me included, to do it the right way and to give your book the best opportunity to sell copies through retail, which Amazon is retail, including bookstores, how much time does it really take for that process to work?
Yeah. Well, it's different at every publisher. So at the big 5 publishers in New York, it can take 2 years from the time that an author is delivering their manuscript through the many phases of editorial and production rounds and positioning for retail and getting into seasonal catalogs. A lot of people are shocked to hear that it really takes that long. But in most cases, there are exceptions. But most publishers are planning their publication schedules 2 years out. Independent publishers have a little bit more agility, and we at Forbes have a faster timeline. In theory, we can publish in about 26 weeks from delivery of manuscript to publication date. Of course, authors are humans, and humans have exceptions. Things come up in your life, and it may take longer than that. But ideally, you want your book to have a title, a cover, and a book description as early as possible. Those are the components that you need in order to get your pre-order page up on Amazon, get your book in online catalogs for booksellers to know about. And some publishers will do that 9 months in advance. But as early as you can go, it can be as short as 2 months in advance. We on average do about 4 months in advance. But you, as early as you can get that pre-order window and that industry trade announcement out that this book is coming, the better chance that you will get eyeballs on it, that you will get buys in retail, and that you will get distribution wider than just online.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes our business challenging is that most of our authors, who are consumers and customers writ large, we live in a world where almost everything is now instant. So, whether it's ordering your double cappuccino latte on the Starbucks app and in 5 minutes pulling through the window and getting it prepared for you, whether it's instantly getting information or purchasing things online through mobile apps, when you say it takes 12 months on average to properly distribute, seed, and sell a book into retail, most people are like, whoa, is this the Stone Age? Are dinosaurs roaming the earth? And we're not here to debate the merits of it, except to say that, look, the way that the publishing industry is built is publishers are what they call selling their catalog to buyers at retail stores and even category buyers at Amazon, because they have that too, 6 to 9 months in advance of the publication date of the book. And so, what I've learned the hard way, because I'm that ADD entrepreneur that wants everything yesterday. But if you really want to maximize your opportunity for success by selling books through retail outlets, the longer in advance that your title is in the queue, the better chance you're giving yourself to have success at retail. And so I think that a lot of authors, they maybe heard, oh, great, KJ said 2 months. Okay, so I'll get my book to you, and 2 months later, it's going to be published. And oh, by the way, I'm expecting that book to be in stores. Well, no. So talk more about that, KJ.
Yeah. Well, I think the other misconception, along with instant gratification, is that any book can be anywhere, because we're used to, everything can appear on Amazon. They can have little to no stock and still have a product page listing and, ship books print on demand. But bookstores don't work that way. They have limited budgets. They have to decide what they're going to buy and how they're going to curate the stores and how they're going to spend their money. And they do that on a monthly basis. And so they're looking at their cash flow projections. And so they want to see, most bookstores, here we are in June, most bookstores already know the vast majority of the books that they're going to be carrying through the holiday season this year. They've already made those decisions because they need to plan their budgets. So that's really just what you have to think about when you're thinking about the limited shelf space in bricks and mortar bookstores.
Yeah, and I will say that 67% of sales are on Amazon, and KJ can give us all the statistics in a minute of where books are sold, and depending on the genre of your book, there's going to be different channels that are more effective than others. But I still believe retail matters. And if you look at commercial real estate trends, one of the things you'll find is that the hottest sector in commercial real estate today, as we are recording this episode, is retail. And by the way, retail includes bookstores. And everybody thought 15 years ago that with the advent of the Kindle, bookstores would vanish. And believe it or not, there's more bookstores today than there were 15 years ago. And oh, by the way, one of the owners and operators of physical bookstores is Amazon, which most people don't know. So retail matters. And if you are successful in getting a book placed in retail outlets, and there has to be real demand for that book to be placed in a retail outlet, it's not just because you're a big name, but there's got to be forecasted demand for that book. Retail placement matters. And so if you want retail placement, the more time you give the team to get that book seated in place, the more success you're going to have. So, the point that I want to make for aspiring authors that are listening to this podcast is, hey, if you want to have retail success with a book, you need patience and you need to be willing to listen to the professional team that's helping you. You can't have an attitude of, I need everything done yesterday, if you want to have a real chance at big success in retail, because the retail industry and publishing just does not work that way.
That's right. Yeah. I would add to that a couple things. One is you have to be open to feedback. Sometimes we will take a book to a retailer and they will say, this cover is not going to work for us. And so an author has to be willing to hear that and potentially change if they really want to be in the retail space. The other thing I would add that I think is really important is to start local. Know your local independent bookseller, so that when your publication date arrives, you can go in with a copy of your book and say, hey, I'm a local author. I just published this book. Would you consider putting it in your local author section? And most local bookstores are very excited and willing to do that. However, if you don't know them and you've never been in the store before, if you walk into an independent bookstore or call them and they specialize in children's books and you're pitching a business books, it's a disconnect. So, know who you're talking to, know who's part of your community, establish a relationship. And I think you'll find that most local bookstores will be very supportive.
And I know, KJ, we make things a lot easier for folks publishing a book with Advantage in Forbes imprints, but what can, on the author side, make things easy so we don't run into, any kind of pain points that may slow down the process and completely throw things off whack? What are some of the steps that people, once they have the idea of writing this book, that will make this process go pretty seamlessly?
Yeah, well, if retail is a goal, I would say be open to feedback from the experts that you're working with, whether it's your editor, if you're working with a ghostwriter, if you're working with folks on our book promotions and marketing team, or me. A lot of us have been in the industry a long time, and we have a really good sense of what the landscape looks like and what the comparative titles look like and what the trends look like. And so when we're making recommendations about title, cover, positioning statement, pricing, these kinds of things, it's because we are in conversation with our retail partners all of the time, and we can anticipate, based on feedback that we've gotten from them before, what they're going to want and what they're going to ask for. So really, listen and collaborate with the partners that you're working with internally. Again, I'll just say, really knowing what your book offers, knowing your elevator pitch, knowing how it fits in to other books that are on the shelf in the genre, so that you can say, it's kind of like this, but like that. So people have a reference point. I think that's always something that I recommend as well.
Joe, I'm going to share this insight when it comes to book distribution and sales through retail. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And here's what I mean. I've seen KJ in action, and KJ has this really artful ability to tell someone in an empathetic way, your title or your cover is not going to work. And so if retail is really important to you, you have to be willing to take our feedback and make changes to the title, make changes maybe to the subtitle, even to the categories and to the cover. If, on the other hand, really what you want is book as business card and retail doesn't matter to you at all, then yes, the title, the cover, the subtitle that you want, because you ultimately are the boss, you can proceed with. Now, the reason that someone engages an independent publisher like us, we hope and believe, is because they want professional guidance and feedback and are willing to listen and be receptive to that. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't create the book that you want and expect it to sell in retail when the distribution team that KJ leads is saying, look, that title's not going to work. That cover's not going to work. The categories that you think that this book falls into, that's not going to work. You've got to be willing to take that feedback. And I say all the time, bait the hook to suit the fish, not the fisherman. And there are some authors, they write the book that they want to write, irregardless of whether or not there's really a market for that book. And so if you're going to be stubborn and say, nope, this is the book that I want to write, this is what I'm going to publish, okay, fine, that's your right. But don't expect to have success in retail when you have a professional team that's saying that's not going to work.
For so many bookstores, their risk tolerance is pretty low. Like if you go into a bookstore and you look at the business category, 70 to 80% of the books on the shelf are the tried and true. They're backlist titles that have been perennial sellers across time, big name authors. And so they've got maybe 20 or 30% of shelf space that they can play with. And so to get into that small percentage of shelf space, you need a reason for that bookseller to believe that they can sell your book. And that reason usually is that you have some established platform, you have marketing and publicity campaign. And so a lot of first-time authors, if they haven't done the groundwork to build a website, to have an email newsletter following, to have a social media presence, then that bookseller is going to look at your book and say, this person is really quite unknown. Even if the title and cover and the content is really great, they can't foresee that there's going to be any demand for the book. And so start early in building your platform. And the book can help catapult that platform and, get you more followers, but you have to have some foundation laid.
Yeah, Joe, the word platform is really instructive because when KJ is trying to sell your book to a retailer or to a buyer at a big retail chain like Barnes & Noble, the question she gets is, well, what's the author's platform? It helps if they're a celebrity, right? It helps if they're a CEO of a name of a company that everybody knows. That all helps. But if you're not one of those two things, then okay, how many social media followers do you have? Do you have a personal brand website? Do you have an email newsletter, and how many people subscribe to that email newsletter? Are you regularly featured in news media? Essentially, if I Google your name, am I going to have to pack a lunch, or are you a ghost? And so really, if you want KJ to have the most success, before you get to KJ, you need to be working on building your platform, because the more assets that you can give her, the more success she's going to have in getting distribution for your book.
Well, let's talk about some of those conversations, KJ. If you can, take us behind the curtain in terms of when you're presenting a book to a store, publisher, anything, anyone who would want the book. How does that normally start, and how does it progress?
Yeah. So for us, we work with a distributor. So we work with Ingram, which is the world's largest book distributor and wholesaler. So we present to them. We have seasonal sales conferences. So twice a year, we go to their team and we showcase, here's what's coming on our list. And then they, in turn, have a global team of sales reps who go out to the accounts that they call on and represent. So someone will go and present to Barnes & Noble. We have an Amazon rep. We have reps who call on libraries, institutions, schools, international accounts, independent bookstores. So it all disseminates from there. But they're really all relying on the data that we feed them, that we supply to the online catalog. So they're all referencing back to what we have supplied them with in terms of the book description, the categories, the author bios, the author platform stats, the key markets, the key readers that we've identified. They're really relying on us to supply them with the information to identify who is the person and where are the markets that will be most relevant for this book.
And KJ, let me have you explain what to many would probably sound like gobbledygook. Publisher, distributor, wholesaler, retailer, like those are lots of words. And
sure.
I think most people think, oh, well, you're the publisher, you sell direct to the bookstore, or you sell direct to Amazon. But again, that is not how the arcane publishing industry works. We prefer to play with dinosaurs. We've got them roaming around. So explain all of the different parties that are part of a book actually selling to a consumer through retail, and how does all that work, and how do these parties play with each other?
Okay, yeah, great question. And it can get very confusing because some entities play multiple roles, right? Like Amazon is a retailer and a publisher. They're also a platform for third-party sellers. So the lines can get very blurry, but I'll just walk through the basics. So publisher, like what we are creating content, packaging it, and sending it off into the world to be published. We're putting our name and our logo behind it. We are, registering the copyright. All the content that is being put out in the world is published by us. When you're working with a distributor, in most cases, that means you are using their warehouse facilities. So when we print our books, they get shipped to the Ingram warehouse. And then they are fulfilling all of the orders that come in from retailers. So those aren't coming to us directly. We're not processing and picking and packing and shipping orders. We rely on our distributor to do that. And the reason why you would work with a distributor is because they have reach, they have resources, they have access to supply chain that smaller independent publishers like us would need massive staff and facilities in order. It would just be very expensive. So distributors really support smaller publishers who need to rely on bigger places who have that to get the kind of reach that we have. A wholesaler is a company that supplies inventory to retailers. So for example, many bookstores will order directly from the publisher or from a distributor in their first round of orders. We call it initial ordering. But not every retailer wants to pay invoices to 30, 40, 50 different publishers. And so wholesalers will stock inventory from multiple publishers so that when retailers need to reorder, they can place 1, 2, 3 big batch orders a week, and they only have to pay one wholesaler. So that's the role of the wholesaler. And then, of course, the retailer is engaging directly with the consumer. So most often that's Amazon or your independent bookstore or an airport bookstore or something like that.
And KJ, very few publishers are their own distributor, maybe with the exception of Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster. I believe that they are not only a publisher, but also a distributor. But 99.9% of publishers are not distributors. They have a distributor relationship. And probably most people have never heard the names of those distributors. It's almost like they're underground. Unless you're in the publishing industry, the name is like Greek to you. I know I've heard you on calls and you'll say Ingram, and they're like, oh, who's Ingram? I've never heard of them. It just so happens they're the largest wholesaler in the world for books. And Ingram is a distributor and a wholesaler, right? They play both roles, which blurs the lines even more. But very few publishers are their own distributor, correct?
Right. The big 5 publishers, so Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, they're their own distributors. But almost all of them have a branch where they are acting as a distributor for smaller independent publishers as well. Everyone in the book industry knows Ingram. Every bookstore has an account with Ingram. You're not, if you don't know Ingram, you're not really in the industry.
That's right. So let me ask one more question when it comes to this chain, right? We have the publisher sells to the distributor sells to the wholesaler sells to the retailer, okay? So let's just say that my beautiful hardcover books, the retail price printed on the back of the book is $29.99. So that's $30. Explain how the money gets chopped up, right? So if the retail price is $30, and maybe we'll use Amazon as an example here, right? But if the retail price is $30, how much money gets divvied up between all those parties? And then, of course, for many authors, they're like, well, what royalty is my publisher paying? And when they hear the amount or the percentage, sometimes they're in shock, right? Like, oh, well, if this book sells for $30, I should at least be getting 20 of that that 30, right?
Right.
I don't think many authors realize the number of middlemen that all have their hand out that need a piece of the pie. So
Absolutely.
perhaps you could explain that.
Sure. Yeah. If a hardcover book is priced at $30, then the retail or the wholesale discount, in most cases, there's going to be variability across publishers. It's about 50%. So when Amazon buys that book from us, they're paying us $15. So we get $15 for the sale of that book. So within that $15, we have to pay the distributor a fee. We're going to pay our author royalty. And then whatever is remaining from that is what's going to our overhead.
Yeah. So as I have famously said, the worst way to make money as an author is by selling copies of your book. Because even at the best, if you're making $3 or $4 a book, to make lots of money, you've got to sell thousands, if not tens of thousands of books, which is not an easy feat. And Joe, maybe with the show notes for this episode, KJ a couple of months ago shared some stats that were released by BookScan about the number of books that sell more than 1,000 copies a year, the number of books that sell more than 10,000 copies a year, the number of books that sell more than 100,000 copies. And it is frightening how few books sell a lot of copies. And it's sobering for any author. And the lesson here is not to be discouraged, but the lesson is to give yourself the biggest opportunity to sell books, you have to build your platform.
Yeah, we'll make sure to share that in the show notes. And KJ, since you've been doing this so long and you've talked about the process, I wonder, and I don't know if this is like ephemeral or subjective, but when you get that book presented to you, you're like, oh yeah, this will sell. Do you have that sort of radar equipment that you're like just like flipping a couple pages or even just looking at the cover, you're like, oh yeah, this book will get into people's hands?
I think I have a pretty good sense now. I mean, of course, this is the game of publishing, right? And, every publisher is like this. You take bets. Publishing is like venture capital in a way,
Las Vegas.
Right. So you think and the market will prove you wrong most of the time. But it's true. The longer you've been in it, the more of a sense that you have that something will just like resonate or sing. Like if you haven't seen something presented in a certain way, or you're seeing something from a voice that hasn't been in this space before, something that feels really original and not like it's just derivative or on repeat, those books stand out from the crowd. And I think those are the ones that we think, oh, we really have an opportunity here.
KJ, talk for a minute about formats. There's hardcover books, there's paperback books, there's ebooks, there's audiobooks. Should authors be publishing in all formats, select formats? And when it comes to sales, where does the pie get divvied up between those formats? And does it depend on the genre and who the target reader is as to what formats are most popular? Give our listeners some education around the format.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the business category because that's what we know and work on the most. Hardcover is still the preferred format for business books. And that's because, for business books, usually you're looking at a more upmarket consumer who's willing to spend a little bit more, who tends to like buying hardcover books and investing in having a hardcover library. It tends to be a little bit more of a prestigious format. And so most of our business book authors start as hardcover editions. Most other genres, however, are paperback preferred. So memoir, self-help, things like that. It can go either way, but you're going to see higher sales in paperback editions. Everyone should have an ebook all the time, regardless if you're publishing hardcover or paperback. We create ebooks for every single one of our titles. And then audio is something that I really encourage people to think about. Audio is a growing format. Every year we hear double-digit growth in the industry. It's still, in terms of overall book sales, a small piece of the pie. probably 10% or less in most cases. But more and more people are really asking for audio editions. And, Joe and I were talking before the show about libraries are offering audiobooks now. Spotify has gone into the audiobook business. So the number of platforms and places that are offering audio continue to expand. So it's really a growing format.
And KJ, when it comes to place, the physical place that books are available, we all know Amazon, we all know Barnes and Noble. There's maybe one or two other big chains in the U.S., and at least in the Southeast, Books A Million has some presence. But talk for a minute about place, right? There's also non-traditional places. There's airport bookstores, which are a bit non-traditional, and then there's specialty retail as well. Should every business author consider airports? Should you ever make a push into specialty retail? I know some authors get very goo-goo-eyed about the idea of having their book in Costco. How should we be thinking about this, and how hard is it to get placed in some of these non-traditional locations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'll talk about Costco first because news just came out in the New York Times just like a week or so ago that Costco's discontinuing their book program outside of holidays only, which is really a blow to the industry because so many publishers had their books placed in Costco. The Costco buying model was always very risky for publishers because, Adam, this isn't something we've touched on yet, but authors should know that all books are sold on a returnable basis. So that means if a retailer buys your book and it doesn't sell through to the consumer, they can return it to the warehouse for full credit. And with Costco, publishers would see 60, 70, sometimes 80% return rate. So you would have to print a lot of books and get a lot of books back, which becomes an expensive proposition. So Costco, sadly, unlikely that most authors will see any placement there. Airports are interesting. Airports are a great place to be for business books because you're in high traffic areas, a lot of business travelers going through. And so in terms of visibility and discoverability, airports are a great option. However, airports are still very competitive. In most cases, you still have to go through a pitching process and be accepted by the buyer. And if you are accepted, it is paid placement. So every book that gets accepted by an airport retailer is paying what we call in the industry co-op placement to be on a table or to be face out in the section of an airport bookstore. And we see some books tend to perform better in airports than others. Entrepreneurship books, leadership books, general self-help or personal development, those do really well. The books that have a harder time are the ones that are really niche, like very specific to an industry, and may not be appealing for the person who's just, traveling through and looking to pick up a book for their next flight.
KJ, if I can unwrap one other thing that you said regarding place, and then before we end, Joe, I do want to talk about returns, because I think that's the most shocking thing to people that don't understand book sales, that every book sold to a retailer can be returned for full credit. But let's first go. So we talked about airports. We talked about a mass market retailer like Costco. You've got Amazon, which is the 800-pound gorilla. When it comes to brick and mortar stores, you've got Barnes and Noble, you've got some chains like Books A Million, and then you've got the independents. Kind of how does all of the other stuff shake out when it comes to retail? And is it easy to get into Barnes and Noble? Is it easy to get into independent retailers? And, if I can't get into an independent retailer, should I be upset? Just kind of coach me on how authors should be thinking about everything else besides airports, mass market, and Amazon.
Yeah, it's never easy. It's very competitive and it's never easy. Barnes and Noble is the retailer that if you really want to get into Barnes and Noble, you need the longest lead time. So back at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about the timing. You really need your book to be ready with all the components 6 months at minimum in advance, ideally 9. And even then, in the last few years, Barnes & Noble has gone through some changes. They have a new CEO, and they used to have a centralized corporate buying team. That really doesn't exist anymore. They've really empowered their local store managers and their regional managers to make the buying decisions for their individual stores. So they operate much more like independent bookstores than a national chain in terms of their buying decisions. And so again, this is where like being a local author comes into play. Your best chance at getting into Barnes & Noble is really approaching your local store and introducing yourself as a local author. And hopefully, if they sell your book, it can expand from there. But it's very rare and very competitive to get a full chain-wide buy. And even if you do, watch out for the returns. Still, Barnes & Noble has made great strides in reducing their return rate, but it's still the game that you play when you're going into spaces like that. In terms of independent bookstores, our team at Ingram has regional reps. So they have a sales rep that will call off, for example, on the Southeast territory. And so they'll be responsible for going out to the independent bookstores in that market, telling them about the catalog that's coming. And again, they're going to be making decisions around who are my local authors? What kind of community do they have? Are they actively driving traffic into my store? This is something that's really important that I want to highlight. If you're building out your author website and you're only linking to Amazon on your book page, that's the fastest way to make sure that Barnes & Noble and local bookstores will never carry your book. They want to see that you support them, that you support, non-Amazon book selling. So be sure, if it's important to you to get placement in retail, be sure to link out to retail on your website in your social media. That's what I want to highlight there.
Okay, and final question for me. Talk about this crazy thing called returns. You're telling me that a book gets sold and then 3 or 4 months later, the bookstore can return it for full credit?
I know, it's crazy. Yeah, that is the way it works. And it's the way it's always worked. And, most publishers dream of it changing, and most booksellers would never have it that way. The industry is stubborn in that way, and it creates a lot of pain. And, it's created, you can read about some situations where some smaller publishers who have, a surprise hit, like they win a Booker Prize or something like that. And then they have to print tons of copies to meet demand. And then, 50% of them come back. It destroys their cash flow. So it can be really hard for publishers to play the game of returns, but it's part of the business. And we all know what to expect. And every retailer is a little bit different. Of course, we're going to get the lowest rate of returns from Amazon because they're very algorithm driven and they have the best predictive models. And so really they're only going to order what they think they're going to sell in the next 12 weeks.
And it sounds like, KJ, because we're an independent publisher, and so a lot of authors are, paying for the printing of their book. It sounds like when it comes to distribution, your advice is to be, aggressive but realistic, because if you print a bunch of books and ship them out, they could all come back, or a good many of them could come back 3 or 4 months later.
Yeah. Yeah. And luckily we have the data to make good forecasts. We have a really good sense of what we think a book is going to sell in its first year. And so we work with all of our authors to recommend print run decisions based on what they personally need, if they're giving book out to clients, but what we've seen comparative titles do in the retail space so that people aren't overprinting or underprinting.
All right, well, let's end with a couple of positives. So, KJ, first, TikTok. people have come to find the world of book talk on TikTok. So tell us about how TikTok is driving book sales.
Oh, it's wild. And I have to admit, I am not on TikTok. And so I'm not the expert on this, but I have, of course, been following what's been happening in the publishing industry. And it's great. It's a great space, particularly for genre fiction authors, for self-help and personal development authors. There have been some massive breakout successes. There was a great story in the New York Times recently about a young, I think she's 25-year-old woman who created a journal. She self-published it, print on demand, and sold 500,000 copies through TikTok. And that led to a 5-book deal with Simon & Schuster. So it can be very powerful for people who have an established presence and brand on TikTok. Like, I don't think it's something that you can jump into and start from scratch, just like, back in the day, people, a lot of authors thought, oh, I have to be on Twitter. And then they tried it and it was like such a clunker. So yeah, if you are performance oriented, if you've got, the knack for short form content and can engage with that community, it's a huge opportunity. But I think for people who aren't accustomed and are authentically engaging on that platform, it can be really difficult to break in.
And lastly, let's finish with a happy ending with one of our authors. Any favorite stories you can share with us as we wrap things up about authors you work with and saw, just the potential and what the book could be, and then seeing it be a success?
Well, yeah, I think that so many of our authors really, they enjoy when they can see their books out in the world. So it's really fun to do airport placement. And, even when I'm traveling, I see our books in the airport stores. It's such a kick to see them represented there or in independent bookstores. And yeah, just people out there seeing their book in the wild, knowing that it's getting into readers' hands, I think is such a charge.
That's awesome. She is KJ Growh, Senior Director of Distribution at Forbes Books. KJ, before we let you go, if folks have any more questions for you, want to reach out to you, where's the best place to find you?
Oh, yeah. It's KJ Growh at ForbesBooks.com.
Awesome. KJ, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
Adam, I got to tell you, that was an education for me. I hate to say this, I learned more in the last 45 minutes about our company than I have in the 4 years. I mean, this is a very eye-opening here with KJ.
There's a lot to it, and there's a lot of misconceptions, which I shared earlier. I think that we need to have her back on a future episode where we can dive even deeper, because when an author understands how the game is being played, it actually allows them to position themselves for more success. So to me, the knowledge of these things is fundamental to success.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you very much. I'll see you next time on Build Your Authority.
Joe, I loved it.